The howl sliced through the night air like a razor. I froze mid-step, my blood turning to ice in my veins. That sound, it wasn't a coyote or a wolf. It was something wrong. Something that shouldn't exist in these woods. My flashlight beam trembled across the forest floor as another howl erupted, closer this time, much closer. The dense pines of the barrens suddenly seemed to close in around me, branches reaching like gnarled fingers in the darkness. I should never have come here, not at night, not alone. The stories about Pine Barrens were just local legends, or so I thought, tall tales to scare tourists and children. But as the unnatural silence fell across the forest, broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing, I knew with terrible certainty that I had made a fatal mistake. My name is Carter, and if you're reading this, it means someone found my journal. It means I didn't make it out of these woods alive. It started 3 days ago. I'd moved to the small town of Pinewick at the edge of the Barrens for a fresh start after college. The rent was cheap, the scenery beautiful, and the quiet exactly what I needed to focus on my writing. My small cabin sat at the edge of town, backed by miles of dense pine forest that stretched into the distance like an ocean of dark green. The locals were friendly enough, but they had their quirks. They never ventured into the deeper parts of the Barrens after sunset. They hung strange charms made of twisted roots and animal bones above their doors. And they went absolutely silent whenever I mentioned exploring the forest at night. "There's nothing worth seeing in there after dark," Old Man Jenkins told me at the general store when I bought my supplies. His eyes, rheumy with age, held a sharpness that made me pause. The Barrens belong to something else when the sun goes down. I smiled politely and paid for my groceries. Another local superstition, I thought. When I mentioned taking night photographs of the forest to capture the stars through the pines, the cashier, a young woman named Sarah, grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Don't," she whispered, "not during the full moon." I laughed it off, but she didn't smile back. That night I sat on my porch, nursing a beer and staring into the wall of pines that bordered my property. The full moon hung fat and yellow above the tree line, casting long shadows across my yard. The forest seemed to breathe in the moonlight, shadows shifting and dancing between the trunks. I heard the first howl just after midnight. It echoed across the Barrens, lingering in the air like smoke. It wasn't like any wolf howl I'd ever heard. Too deep, too human. My skin prickled with goosebumps despite the warm summer night. The next morning, police cars lined the main street of Pinewick. A hiker had been found dead 2 miles into the Barrens, or what was left of him. I overheard fragments of conversation. Torn apart, animal attack, no tracks. Sheriff Donovan, a weathered man with a perpetual scowl, was addressing a small crowd when I approached. "No staying out of the woods for the next few nights. This was likely a bear or cougar, but until we can confirm..." "It wasn't no bear," interrupted a grizzled old-timer. "You know what it was, Sheriff. Same as 10 years ago. Same as 30 years before that." The sheriff's face hardened. "That's enough, Earl. We don't need that kind of talk." When the crowd dispersed, I approached Donovan. "I live in the Murphy cabin," I said. "Should I be worried?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "You're the writer, Carter, right?" I nodded. "Stay out of the Barrens for a few days," he advised, "especially after dark. We'll have this sorted soon enough." That night I couldn't sleep. The forest seemed to press against my windows and the moonlight cast strange, shifting patterns on my bedroom wall. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. That same howl, but closer to town. I peered through my window toward the tree line. For a moment, I thought I saw something move between the pines. Something large and dark, walking on 2 legs before dropping to all 4s and vanishing into the shadows. I told myself it was just my imagination. The next day, Sheriff Donovan ordered a curfew. No one was to be out after sunset, and the Barrens were strictly off limits. A second body had been found, a forest ranger who'd gone looking for the animal responsible for the first killing. The town felt different that day. Doors were locked, windows shuttered. People hurried through their errands, glancing nervously at the forest as if it might suddenly surge forward and swallow the town. I stopped at the local library, searching for information on Pine Barrens history. The elderly librarian watched me with wary eyes as I collected books on local legends and wildlife. "Looking for something specific?" she asked. "Just curious about the local superstitions," I replied. "About the Barrens at night." She pursed her lips. "It's not superstition if it's true," she said softly, before returning to her desk. I spent the afternoon reading accounts of disappearances and deaths in the Barrens going back over a century. Every 30 years, like clockwork, there would be a series of animal attacks lasting exactly 3 nights during the full moon. The descriptions were always the same: victims torn apart, partially devoured, with strange tracks that seemed to shift between human and wolf. And there were older stories, passed down from the indigenous people who had avoided the Barrens long before European settlers arrived. They spoke of a creature that walked as both man and wolf, a cursed being that hunted during the full moon, feeding on human flesh to maintain its unnatural existence. I was so engrossed in my reading that I didn't notice the sun setting. By the time I left the library, darkness had fallen. The streets were empty, lights glowing behind curtained windows as I hurried toward my cabin. I was halfway home when I heard it, the snap of a branch from the woods that ran alongside the road. I quickened my pace, my heart hammering against my ribs. Another snap, closer now. I broke into a run, the weight of my backpack filled with books thumping against my spine with each stride. Behind me, something crashed through the underbrush, moving parallel to the road. I reached my cabin and slammed the door behind me, fumbling with the lock. Through the window, I stared out at the dark wall of trees. Nothing moved, but I knew something was watching me. I pulled the curtains closed and spent the night poring over the books I'd borrowed, piecing together the legend of what the locals called the Walker in Darkness. According to the oldest accounts, it had once been a man, a settler who had become lost in the Barrens during winter. Starving and freezing, he had made a pact with something ancient that dwelled in the deepest part of the forest. It gave him the strength and form to survive, but at a terrible price. Every 30 years during the full moon, he was compelled to hunt and feed. But these were just stories, legends meant to explain tragic deaths in a wilderness that was often unforgiving. There had to be a rational explanation for what was happening now. The third night of the full moon arrived. I had every light in my cabin blazing, casting a bubble of artificial day around my home. The forest beyond seemed darker by contrast, an impenetrable wall of blackness. At midnight, the power went out. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the sudden darkness. Outside, the wind had picked up, branches scraping against the sides of the cabin like fingernails. I tried my phone, no signal. That's when I heard heavy footsteps on my porch. Not an animal, a person. A sharp knock rattled my door. "Carter?" Sheriff Donovan's voice. "You in there?" "We need to evacuate. There's a fire approaching from the north end of the Barrens." Relief flooded through me as I moved to the door, but something held me back, a primal instinct screaming danger. Why would the sheriff come alone? Where were the lights of his patrol car? "Carter?" The voice was still Donovan's, but something in the tone had shifted, something hungry. I backed away from the door. "I'll meet you in town," I called out. "Just need to grab a few things." A long silence followed, then a low rumbling growl, a sound no human throat could make. The door handle began to turn, slowly testing the lock. I grabbed my backpack and ran for the back door, bursting out into the night. The full moon illuminated the yard in silver light as I sprinted for the tree line. Yes, I ran into the Barrens, the very place I should have avoided, but whatever was at my door was between me and town, and I knew these woods connected to the highway several miles to the east. If I could reach it, I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face as I ran. Behind me, a splintering crash told me my cabin door had given way. A howl of rage split the night, closer then immediately closer still. It was following, hunting. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs trembled with each step. The moonlight filtered through the canopy in patches, just enough to keep me from running headlong into trees. I had no idea if I was still heading east or if I'd gotten turned around in my panic. The forest had gone silent. No insects, no night birds, nothing but the sound of my labored breathing and footfalls on pine needles. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a massive pine. The silence pressed against my ears until I heard a soft crunch of leaves, so faint I almost missed it. Slowly, I turned my head. 30 yards away, between two ancient trunks, something stood watching me. The moonlight caught only highlights. The gleam of eyes, the wet sheen of what might have been a snout, the outline of a form too tall, too upright to be a wolf, yet too bestial to be human. I didn't move. Neither did it. We remained locked in that moment, predator and prey, as the seconds stretched painfully. Then it stepped forward into a shaft of moonlight, and I saw it clearly. God help me, I saw it. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, its body a grotesque merger of man and beast. Coarse, dark fur covered rippling muscles. But the proportions were all wrong. The torso too long, the arms hanging almost to the ground, ending in hands that were halfway to paws, with black claws like curved daggers. Its legs were bent backward at the knee like a wolf's hind legs, balanced on massive pawed feet. But its face, that's what froze my blood. A wolf's head, but with eyes too intelligent, too aware. Human eyes glittering with malice and hunger in the moonlight. Its muzzle pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of yellowed fangs. It knew I was seeing it. It was enjoying my terror. I ran like I've never run before, abandoning any pretense of direction or strategy. Pure animal panic propelled me through the trees, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. Behind me, it followed, not running flat out, but pacing me, playing with me. I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, sometimes to my left, sometimes to my right, hurting me. I realized too late that I was being driven deeper into the barrens, away from the highway, away from town, away from any hope of rescue. The trees began to thin, and suddenly I burst into a clearing, a perfect circle of open ground, perhaps 50 yards across, bathed in moonlight. At its center stood a single massive pine, ancient and gnarled, its trunk wider than a car. I skidded to a halt at the edge of the clearing. Something about that tree sent waves of dread through me. It felt wrong, corrupt. The bark was too dark, the branches twisted in unnatural angles. From the trees behind me came a low growl. I was trapped between the creature and whatever malevolence that ancient pine represented. I chose to run for the far side of the clearing. I made it halfway before the werewolf, there's no other word for what it was, burst from the tree line and cut me off. It moved with impossible speed, loping on all fours before rising to its hind legs, blocking my path. This time there was nowhere to run. It circled me slowly, those human eyes never leaving mine. I backed toward the central tree, my only thought to keep something at my back. A mistake. As soon as my shoulder blades touched the rough bark, I felt a surge of something pass through me. Cold, ancient malice. A hungry sentience that was suddenly aware of me. The werewolf stopped its approach, watching, waiting. "What do you want?" I gasped, the words tearing from my dry throat. It cocked its head, a gesture so human it sent fresh horror through me. "To feed," it replied, the words mangled by its inhuman muzzle, but unmistakably English. "To survive." It could speak. God help me, it could speak. "You're the walker," I said, remembering the legends. "The settler who made a pact." A sound emerged from its throat, a rumbling that might have been laughter. "The pact is older than any settler," it growled. "Older than your kind's memory. I am merely its current vessel." It took a step closer. I pressed harder against the tree, feeling the bark dig into my back. "Every 30 years," I said, desperately trying to keep it talking, to delay the inevitable. "You hunt for 3 nights. 3 nights, 3 kills," it confirmed. "To feed the hunger of what dwells beneath." It gestured toward the tree at my back. "Tonight is the 3rd night. You are the 3rd kill." My mind raced. "But you've already killed 2, the hiker and the ranger." The werewolf's muzzle pulled back in that terrible approximation of a smile again. "The night is not yet over." It lunged, faster than my eye could track. I dove to the side, feeling claws tear through my jacket, missing my flesh by inches. I scrambled across the clearing, but it was on me again in seconds, batting me aside like a cat with a mouse. I slammed into the ground, pain exploding through my shoulder. The creature stood over me, saliva dripping from its jaws. "Run!" it rumbled. "Run again. It makes the meat taste better when fear has seasoned it." I staggered to my feet and backed away. It followed leisurely, enjoying the game. We had done a half circuit of the clearing when I felt my backpack bump against something. The fallen trunk of a dead pine, silver gray in the moonlight. My hand closed around a broken branch. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. As the werewolf tensed to spring, I swung with all my strength. The branch connected with its snout with a satisfying crack. The creature howled in pain and rage, recoiling momentarily. I used that moment to dive past it, running for the trees again. I made it perhaps 10 yards before claws raked across my back, tearing through jacket, shirt, and skin. I screamed as white-hot pain exploded across my shoulders. The impact sent me sprawling face first into the pine needles. Rough hands grabbed me, flipping me onto my wounded back. The werewolf straddled me, its weight crushing the breath from my lungs. Its face lowered toward mine, hot breath reeking of copper and rot washing over me. "The pact must be honored," it growled. "The hunger must be fed." Its jaws opened wide, impossibly wide, as it lunged for my throat. In desperate reflex, I brought my hands up, catching its neck, holding those deadly teeth inches from my skin. Its strength was overwhelming, the jaws inching closer despite my resistance. Claws dug into my sides, drawing fresh pain and blood. My vision began to darken at the edges. This was it. This was how I would die. A gunshot shattered the night. The werewolf jerked, a howl of pain replacing its growls. It rolled off me, turning toward this new threat. Sheriff Donovan stood at the edge of the clearing, revolver raised for another shot. Behind him, a group of townspeople clutched an assortment of weapons, rifles, shotguns, even axes and pitchforks. "Get away from him!" Donovan shouted, firing again. The bullet struck the werewolf in the shoulder, staggering it, but not stopping it. "You cannot interfere!" the creature roared, its voice carrying inhuman power that seemed to shake the clearing. "The pact must be completed." An old man stepped forward. I recognized him as Earl from town. "The pact calls for 3 lives during the full moon," he called out. "It doesn't specify whose." The werewolf hesitated, its gaze moving between me and the group of townspeople. Earl raised an ancient-looking rifle. "We know what you are, Walker. We know what binds you to this form, to this curse. The town has protected you for generations, providing outsiders to satisfy the hunger." My blood ran cold at his words. The town knew. They had always known. "But no more," Earl continued. "Tonight, we end it." The werewolf threw back its head and howled, a sound of such primal rage and anguish that the very air seemed to vibrate with it. Then it charged, not at me, but at the line of townspeople. Gunfire erupted, bullets tearing into the creature's flesh. It staggered but kept coming, reaching the first offender and tearing him apart with a single swipe of its claws. Blood sprayed across the moonlit clearing as the man's screams cut off abruptly. Chaos erupted. Some townspeople fled into the trees, others continued firing. The werewolf moved among them like a demon, claws and teeth flashing in the moonlight, bodies falling in its wake. Sheriff Donovan reached me, hauling me to my feet. "Can you run?" he demanded. I nodded weakly, the pain in my back flaring with each movement. "Then run. Get to the tree line and keep going south. There's a ranger station 2 miles that way." "What about you?" I gasped. His weathered face was grim in the moonlight. "Someone's got to end this. Go." He pushed me toward the trees and turned to face the carnage. The werewolf had killed at least 3 townspeople and was pursuing others into the forest. I staggered toward the tree line, each step sending fresh waves of pain through my lacerated back. Behind me, I heard Donovan shout, drawing the creature's attention back to the clearing. I should have kept running. I should have saved myself. Instead, I turned back. Donovan stood before the ancient pine at the center of the clearing, his revolver aimed not at the werewolf, but at the tree itself. "It ends tonight," he shouted as the creature bounded toward him. "No more sacrifices." He fired, the bullet striking the trunk of the ancient pine. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air itself seemed to tear. A sound beyond hearing, beyond comprehension, rippled across the clearing. The massive pine began to shudder, its bark splitting to reveal something beneath, something that pulsed and writhed with unnatural life. The werewolf skidded to a halt, howling in what sounded like fear. From the split in the tree, darkness poured forth, not absence of light, but something tangible, something alive. It coiled and twisted in the air, reaching tendrils toward the werewolf. The creature tried to flee, but the darkness engulfed it, lifting it from the ground. Its howls turned to screams, human screams, as its body began to twist and change, fur receding, limbs reshaping. Where the werewolf had been, a man now hung suspended in that living darkness, middle-aged, ordinary, his naked body covered in scars, both old and fresh. His eyes met mine across the clearing, filled with decades of horror and regret. "I'm sorry," he called out, his voice breaking. "I couldn't stop it. I couldn't." The darkness contracted suddenly, violently. The man's words cut off in a wet, terrible sound as his body simply collapsed, crushing inward like an aluminum can in a giant's fist. The darkness retreated into the ancient pine, the split in its bark sealing as if it had never been. The clearing fell silent except for the moans of the wounded. I limped to where Donovan stood, staring at the tree. What was that?" I gasped. The sheriff's face was ashen. "Something that should never have been fed," he said quietly. "Something our ancestors made a deal with. Protection for the town in exchange for offerings." He holstered his empty revolver with a shaking hand. "Every 30 years it required feeding. 3 lives during the full moon. The town would find outsiders, hikers, campers, lure them into the barrens at night. And the werewolf," I asked, "its servant, its hunter, a man cursed to that form, bound to provide the sacrifices." He looked at me, his eyes haunted. "Always a man from Pinewick. When one dies, another is chosen. It's been happening for over 200 years. I felt sick. How many people have died?" "Too many," he whispered. "Far too many. But it's over now." He looked back at the ancient pine. "I don't know if we've killed it, but we've broken the cycle, broken the pact." In the days that followed, the official story was that a pack of rabid wolves had attacked hikers and then the search party. The bodies of the townspeople were buried with honors. No mention was made of the ancient pine or the thing that dwelled within it. My wounds healed, leaving scars that pull and ache when the moon is full. I should have left Pinewick, should have run as far as I could from Pine Barrens and its horrors. But I stayed. Someone needs to watch the ancient pine, to ensure that what sleeps beneath it remains sleeping. Someone needs to remember to keep others from entering the barrens during the full moon. Because sometimes in the deepest part of night, I hear it again. That howl that is neither wolf nor human. And I fear that the pact was not broken, merely altered. The thing in the pine still hungers, and I dream of running on 4 legs beneath the moon.